Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week in partnership with the Daily Beast. Aaron Zaleski is the Paris correspondent. Welcome back. Welcome back as well to Eleanor Beardsley with National Public Radio in the United States. Dorian Malovic, Asia editor of the French daily newspaper La Croix and the co-author of North Korea in 100 Questions. And Judah Grunstein, editor-in-chief of World Politics Review. We were mentioning Russia before the break. Speaking of Russia, the Turkish president, who happened to be in Moscow this Friday, Vladimir Putin and Recep Tayyip Erdogan, talking trade, and of course Syria, where they haven't patched it up completely, what with Ankara and Moscow on opposing sides, when it comes to Kurdish militias. Erdogan, who's in full campaign mode for that April 16th referendum to have the Constitution grant him executive powers. On that score, every vote counts, and with Turks abroad taking part in the referendum, Erdogan dispatching his foreign minister this week to Germany. Germany home to more than 1 million eligible Turkish voters to patch things up after an escalation that began with the jailing of the correspondent of newspaper Die Welt in Istanbul. The president, at the beginning of the week, had branded a ban on Turkish ministers campaigning in certain German cities as Nazi-era practices. We'll give you the short version. The breakfast didn't seem to resolve very much.
And all of this is especially sad because Nazi comparisons are always fundamentally wrong, as they downplay the crimes against humanity of Nazi Germany, and we will never allow that.
We're not personally calling anyone Nazis. Our president made a comparison to the practices, and I've already told Sigmar Gabriel what we meant by this.
Will you go to Holland, to Rotterdam?
I will go, of course I will go. Everyone should know that these types of practices and hurdles cannot stop us. No one can prevent us from meeting our citizens in the places they live. We'll not be deterred by racist fascists like Geert Wilders.
By the way, the latest has just come in on this because the Turkish foreign minister has not been allowed to campaign in Rotterdam on Saturday. That's according to the mayor of that Dutch port city. Quote, he has diplomatic immunity and everything, so we will treat him with respect, but we have every other instrument to prevent things happening in public spaces. That's according to Rotterdam Mayor Ahmed Abu Taleb. So it's not just Germany. By the way, there's also Austria in this mix as well. Turkey defiant.
And Erdogan, with his natural talent for nuanced, subtle declarations. I think what's interesting to me about this is that last comment of the Turkish foreign ministers, where he called Geert Wilders, who's the Dutch sort of nationalist, populist, anti-immigrant politician who looks like he's set to win the most seats in parliament in next week's election. He called him a fascist, and
he also made it sound like Wilders was pulling the strings on this one.
Well, I think Wilders is definitely driving a lot of the rhetoric and the sentiment. But what's interesting is that we've talked over the last months now of this populist wave, of which Erdogan is emblematic, Putin is emblematic, and Wilders is emblematic, Le Pen here in France, who we'll talk about later. But here you see that actually it's not a global. This isn't a transnational movement. This is a movement of nationalists, nations nationalists, that once they're in office risk really being in conflict with each other. So Wilders, even though he might have the same instincts as Erdogan politically, in terms of their agendas, it's radically different. And even if Turkey and Russia have patched things up recently over Syria, just over a year ago, I think it was, Turkey downed two Russian jets over its territory. So we're talking a lot about this global populist nationalist wave, but they don't have a lot in common. It's not going to be a sort of a populist international.
It's not going to be a populist international, but what we do have for the time being is this ugly standoff, and Turks who live in Europe are sort of caught in between in all of this.
It's definitely heating up, the dispute between Erdogan and Angela Merkel. I think if you remember about a month ago, Erdogan had rebuked Merkel for using the term Islamist terror or something along those lines. And so then he sort of fires back with this Nazi remark. I think it goes beyond the campaigning. I think Europe is actually really concerned about what could be the outcome of this referendum and how Turkey could become increasingly autocratic if it passes. And so I think the concern is beyond that campaigning, but the result of the referendum.
All right, speaking of campaigning, you were mentioning there the Dutch elections, which take place next week. We have an election here in France coming up. We're a little over 6 weeks away. On the campaign trail, the week began with conservative Les Républicains leaders reluctantly coming to the conclusion that there is no plan B to the candidacy of François Fillon despite his parliamentary payroll scandal. Later in the week, a poll for the first time putting centrist independent candidate Emmanuel Macron ahead of the far-right's Marine Le Pen. The 39-year-old Macron joined on stage Wednesday night by his wife Brigitte. One poll this Friday has Macron and Le Pen in a dead heat after the first round, with Macron trouncing the National Front leader in a May runoff. I say trouncing, but I'm seeing a lot of 60-40. Is it really trouncing? Maybe that's the wrong word to be using, Eleanor Beardsley.
That wouldn't really be trouncing, but you know, François, after all of these elections, people are wary of the polls, as we know. And, you know, Emmanuel Macron is this new candidate, young, dynamic. He's come out of nowhere. He's partially benefited from Fillon's fake job allegations against him concerning his wife. But we don't know if his base will really go out and vote, I've been told. He's fragile, Emmanuel Macron. So even if they say 60-40, do we know that? You know, Marine Le Pen's base is going to be there and support her, for sure. Fillon's base will support him. But who is Macron's base? Is it Fillon people who might change their mind and go back to him? We don't really know, and that's what's hard to take these polls
We're seeing a
seriously.
redrawing of politics in France. The old right versus left doesn't work anymore, and Macron's novelty is that he's a centrist, but in the past in France, centrist always meant center-right.
Right. He's, yeah, I mean, you talk to different people, some will say, no, he's too much, he's come from the left, but he has innovative ideas. He speaks of innovation. He says to people, I can't guarantee you won't lose your job. You're going to lose your job, but you're going to get training for a new job because that's how it goes, you know. So he really is speaking differently. And I try to, you know, I tell Americans, can you imagine a race where like one of the Democrats or Republicans was like out of the game and someone who just comes in, creates their new party, might be the next president? I mean, it's unheard of. It's so exciting.
Can you win without the machine?
Well, I'm not very well in French politics, actually, but I'm watching that, and it's like for me, it's a foreign country. Really. I mean, you are Americans and you watched France and say, do you recognize this political panorama now? I mean, it's totally on the verge of imploding or exploding.
Yeah.
Depends.
All right, what's imploding, what's exploding?
I mean, both right-wing party, I mean, LR and the PS, Socialist Party, are going to implode. Yeah. They are imploding now, and they might explode for the legislative after the presidential
because
vote.
People forget that after, let me just explain, there's 2 rounds of the presidential election, but then you got to have a majority. If you want to govern, you need a majority in parliament.
Otherwise, it's a minority or it's a cohabitation, and we know what happened with the cohabitation. I mean, the president couldn't do anything. But then it's frightening because when you count, I mean, if you don't rely on polls, right? Let's just forget the polls for a moment. You have the extreme right, which is strong, and now Fillon is really weak in front of Macron. You don't know if after on the second turn, I mean, second round, Fillon voters, what are they going to do? They might vote for Le Pen, right? Course, yeah. And then Mélenchon, extreme left, they can vote for Le Pen because there are connections.
Yeah.
So the scenario you have, I heard you talking about 52-48% on a second round. It's possible. And it's very serious.
What you said about the sort of political landscape in France, the map being redrawn, the Socialist Party for the last generation, let's say, has been a sort of a coalition party. In other countries, it would have been a coalition government, but they have the coalition within the party. So you have the left wing, which actually won the primary under Benoît Hamon. And then you have a centrist reformist wing, which was the government of Manuel Valls, the prime minister, and President François Hollande's project. Macron kind of stole that electorate right there. But the Socialist Party, you have supporters, you have socialists that are endorsing Macron instead of their own party's candidate. In other words, that party no longer really exists.
So the new fault line seems to be Europe and Putin. There are those who are pro-Europe and anti-Putin, and those who are anti-Europe and pro-Putin.
It's complicated because there's a vertical axis now in terms of Europe and nationalism or elites and more populist approach. At the same time, on the extremes, you see, at least for the first round, very strong commitment. So Mélenchon, who is a far left.
He's on 11% according to that poll.
But those 11%, they're solid voters for him. The socialist candidate, Hamon, same thing. On the far left, it's very committed, at least for the first round. And on the far right, it's very committed for the first round. The question is when you have to choose between you're not first choice candidate anymore. And there, the connections, for instance, most of the Marine Le Pen's and the National Front's strongholds are in former communist regions or the South. And so you have, we saw it with Trump, where you had disaffected working class voters who went Republican instead of Democrat. That's where, for the second round, we're in territory that no one can predict because the past behaviors, the institutions that structured past behaviors no longer exist.
Do you have any more clarity, Aaron Zaleski, when you see the events of the past week? What with Fillon hanging on? By the way, Dorian's saying that he's out of it. He's on 19-20%. He's not out of it completely.
Right. I was astonished that he didn't resign. I think a lot of people were expecting him to step down and expecting someone to step in, and the fact that that didn't happen kind of left people just, what just happened? And then
there's a new respect for him now. People are like, oh, he really held on. And I've seen people go, well,
He's deceptive, though. He's always been this sort of soft-spoken guy. He looks like a village notable. But he's a fighter. I mean, he's the only, he got through a social security reform in France as prime minister under Sarkozy. He lasted 5 years under Sarkozy, so that alone.
He swallowed it all.
He has also really a strong support base.
Pride.
And what do you say? Well, but that's amazing. Your reactions are is very interesting. I mean, as Americans. I mean, for me, no, I mean, suddenly he's a strong guy.
Well, that's the French are saying that.
He has a strong support base. I covered his rally last weekend, and the question I was posing to people was, okay, if he drops out, who are you going to vote for? And they refused to. I said, there's no one. I could not imagine voting for anyone
they said their vote would be taken away.
It would be a disaster if he dropped out.
But for me, I mean, to accept that this guy can be indicted on 15th of March, or to
placed
be
under formal investigation. That's what they said.
Dorian, everybody does it. That's what you hear now. Well, everybody hires their wife and their, father
So that's my problem. That means
for an American, that's the scandal.
It's the system.
That's legal.
For the French people, I mean the pueblo, the people, we just accept that. I mean, it doesn't
Do
matter.
the French accept it anymore, though?
They don't. They don't accept it.
Or is France changing on that?
It's changing. It's been done. People say it's the system the problem, but Fillon can change that system. He apologized. He said it was morally not right. So many other people are doing that. And we don't know. He's innocent until proven guilty. We don't know. Maybe his wife did do that job. We don't know.
There's other allegations, though. There's an undeclared interest-free loan from a financier who owns a magazine that hired Fillon's wife.
Proven guilty, but anyway, I mean, it's for so many people, he's strong enough. He survived.
But I agree with you in the sense that in France, the norms and the culture in terms of corruption for an American, especially, or even, I mean, compared to like Northern Europe, it's completely retrograde. We saw this when Manuel Valls, as prime minister, he flew his two sons on the official airplane to Germany for the Champions League final. And he apologized. He paid for the tickets. But in Northern Europe, he would have been out of office. Even in the U.S., it's not sure he would have survived. In France, it's sort of like, everyone does it. It's expected.
A final point on this. Eleanor Beardsley, 24 hours ago, we did a debate. It was about Macron's his surge in the polls. And at several occasions, the conversation shifted back to ethics and Fillon. We thought this would be a campaign about national identity, about all that. So far, it's just turned into a campaign about Fillon, about ethics. Is that changing at all?
I think that will start to change now. I feel like Fillon's back. He's the candidate. We've gotten over that hump. I don't know what else more could be said about it. You're either going to vote for him or not. I think the campaign starts now. People are going to really start focusing on their programs, and we'll see.
All right. Speaking of winners and losers, sports fans in the French capital feeling the sting of Barcelona's historic 6-1 comeback in the return leg of the Champions League last 16, scoring 3 goals against Paris Saint-Germain in the last 7 minutes. Some PSG fans so angry, they went to the airport in the middle of the night to jeer the losing side as it returned from the Catalan capital. Now, contrast that, if you will, with the hero's welcome that Sébastien Destremaux will receive when he drops anchor on Saturday lunchtime after finishing the Vendée Globe solo round-the-world yacht race. He'll be finishing it, by the way, dead last, arriving back in the Atlantic port of Sables d'Olonne nearly 2 months after the winner. About time. The 53-year-old Frenchman has just run out of food, and he's lost without those rations.
I'm not a great fisherman. Actually, I'm pretty dreadful. So I'm not gonna, well, we'll see. At least I believe in myself.
This is so French, this story, isn't it, Dorian Malvik?
It's so cool. The guy. But for me, that guy is a fighter. Mm-hmm. In a French way, in a cool way. He just survived, for many months. He didn't look for prestige or for the winning, and he had to do it, and he did it. And this is this kind of lightness, it's a victory, To be the last is a victory.
It's also a race that's become sort of professionalized in the terms of having huge teams, using huge investments and a lot of technology. And he just went out and did it on his own, knowing he never had any illusion. And he did it for that very reason, this idea of trying to repersonalize it and make it back into what it started out, which was just sailors and alone with the water. I agree. It's a really inspiring story.
In the summertime, when there's the Tour de France cycling race, there are huge cheers for the rider who's known as the Red Lantern, which is the one who's last in the overall standings. Is this something typically French to cheer for the guy who's not the loser, but the guy who's hanging in there in last place?
Yes. Maybe, but maybe not. Americans love the underdog too. The Chicago Cubs. I don't know.
The weak. You have the strong and the weak,
and
then
the very last one hanging in there. You got to go.
It's not really weak, right? It's like will of iron to do it.
No.
I don't know if anyone is familiar with sailing or yachting, but it's really difficult and it expends a lot of energy. So to imagine just one person doing this solo, it's
without food.
You
extremely impressive.
You just can't sleep more than like 4 hours at a time. How do people go months?
Aaron Zaleski, was it culture shock to discover how much the French are into sailing?
It was a bit. I spent a bit of time living in Sweden, so it's very much ingrained in the culture there. But I didn't realize that it was so popular here in France as well.
And what do you make of the contrast between these two stories this week and the way the French capital has handled that historic loss against Barcelona, coupled with this?
Well, I think people are much more emotionally involved in football than they are in sailing. So I would attribute it to the level of emotional involvement.
It's also, that loss was so improbable.
Right.
I wasn't watching the game, but my son was following it online. And at one point it was 3-1, and because of the way the goals are counted away and at home, really the game was over. And then he came in and told me Paris just lost, and I thought he was just sort of pulling my chain.
Crying. And I was like, oh my God, no, I felt upset then.
Well, there's some of us who are old enough to remember 1982 and that loss against West Germany.
Yeah.
So yeah. Anyway, the joy of victory and the agony of defeat. We'll be talking about it in future editions. Judah Grunstein, Eleanor Beardsley, Dorian Malevich, and Aaron Zaleski. Please stay with us because Media Watch is next. And we say hello to Diptyque Laurent.
Hi, François.
We were saying it at the outset of the show, a historic day for South Korea.
That's right, an historic day, and it's being really shown on social media as well. There have been a lot of reactions to Park Geun-hye being forced out of office over that ongoing scandal. A lot of people on Twitter and Facebook and social media feel that it's a right decision. They've been taking to the streets to celebrate her departure. And there's also, interestingly, been a lot of references to chicken. It's actually a word that's used to denigrate the South Korean president. Her name, Park, rhymes with chicken in Korea, and they often call her Chicken Geun-hye. And as a result, two of South Korea's biggest search engines were offering recommendations for chicken restaurants this Friday. They also, on Twitter, people have been sharing dishes like this, chicken noodles, I assume, or just noodles, which is typically a dish that is eaten during periods of celebration in South Korea. So South Koreans have been able to find the funny side in what's a very serious saga in the country. The Korea Times actually reports that security has been beefed up for those 8 constitutional judges who were part of that decision. In fact, one of the judges, the Chief Justice, her name is Lee Jung-mi, she arrived at the Constitutional Court on Friday morning with these pink hair curlers still in her hair. And this image has gone viral in South Korea. It even topped the most searched for image in South Korean search engines. The reason being, people see these hair curlers as a symbol of her hard work. The fact that she's dedicated to her job so much so that...
She was too busy to go to the hair.
Exactly. She was so dedicated to her job that she left her house with these curlers in. It appears that she didn't know she still had them in. And they're seeing this as a very positive contrast to Geun-hye as well.
Let me ask you, Dorian, just going back to the jokes about chicken and how it rhymes with her name, and we haven't heard much of her. In fact, she's proved really reclusive. I mean, she hasn't.
She's like a monk, actually, in the Blue House, really.
Blue House, the presidential palace.
Yeah, it's the White House in Seoul.
Wraith, right? Like a wraith.
Yeah, I mean, but this is very Korean. I mean, this is typical of the women of the 50s, you know. And it's connected also with a kind of serious, you know, mature, serious. And this woman is very popular, actually. She's very serious. She's very professional. Great job.
They
really.
see her as a contrast, a very positive contrast to Geun-hye, because famously prosecutors say Geun-hye summoned her hairstylist to her office in the midst of a ferry tragedy in 2014, where hundreds of teenagers died. So people see her as a very positive contrast to that image.
All right. Another story that you're showing us is, I guess let's call it a cautionary tale for all journalists who are sitting here around the table.
Especially stay-at-home parents, François. This video came out of South Korea. In fact, it was an expert on South Korea who was speaking to the BBC when his kids video bombed his live interview, and he stayed remarkably calm. Let's take a look.
Scandals happen all the time. The question is, how do democracies respond to those scandals?
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me.
That's right.
My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited in the last 6 months to a year.
If I may, Robert Kelly is the specialist, and he's one of the top specialists in terms of North Korea, South Korea. Yeah. He's an excellent resource for anyone who wants to know about it. Apparently, he's treating it with good humor. It could, but for the grace of God,
he
go
behaved so much. I mean, he just remained on the. And my apology.
Just to his credit, that he be known also for being a really, really valuable resource on the Koreas. He's definitely someone that anytime he writes about it, I read. Yeah. He's got a great blog also.
And who's discovered the joys of live television.
A consummate professional, absolutely. He actually just tweeted, he tweeted, somebody tweeted to him saying, "Can I share your video?" And he gave the most sweetest response. He said, "What would that mean? Would you post it here on Twitter? Is this the kind of thing that goes viral and gets weird. So
He has the answer to that.
Oh my God.
Well, we're talking about it now. Eleanor Beardsley, what was your reaction?
I just love that. That could happen to me, but it would be like radio, it wouldn't be video, so it wouldn't be as bad. But that's just, I think he handled it very well, and it's endearing.
Yeah.
I think he's going to boost his popularity totally.
When the second one kind of toddled
You
in,
couldn't
that was
script
the
it
best
better.
part.
Like
Yeah,
They were sweet little children. They weren't coming in there to be, you know.
Anyway, all right. Well, many thanks. Deeptika Laurent, I guess we can sample that with the permission of Mr. Kelly. I want to thank you. I want to thank our panel once again. Thank you for joining us here in The World This Week.